Hello all, and this video is going to be me throwing my head against the wall over one of my favorite thinkers that influenced me in my youth. Since I talked about some of the other thinkers that were kind of just more necessary, or I had something to kind of take from them, maybe perhaps in a contrarian way, even intentionally, to do that with a lot of postmodernists. But I think for this one I wanted to get away perhaps from just esoteric political philosophy all the time, or just philosophy in general, and do something more laid back with someone that's still actually alive even. Funny enough, he's about the same age as my grandfather is. But yeah, Thomas Sowell obviously is kind of the daddy intellectual of any based minority on the internet, political, I guess, right-wing sphere. And obviously, as I was kind of piercing through some of his older lectures today, to kind of reacquaint myself, because it's been a number of years since I've read or even looked at his stuff. He kind of has that neocon libertarian attitude, and there's only so much I could take from that. I don't really align myself with that so much anymore, but he was still very important for me to get to where I am, and I think there's still a lot to take from him that I can rub up against perhaps in this video. And so, if you're not acquainted with his work, he's obviously an economist who's pointed out all these flaws and grifting attitudes in minority communities, especially in his own black community. Things like affirmative action, I think you can extrapolate, and I certainly did, when you take my video Quantities of Color, as someone who may or may not got some advantages in academia from affirmative action programs. I mean, there's no way to really know, and I guess that's kind of overlapping with some Fanon takes with that kind of existential nightmarish displaced attitude of is this based off of merit or not? But casting that aside, nonetheless, the state policy itself of affirmative action, not only is it I think morally against whites and Asians to oppose, but more than that, it actually limits the growth of these black students. You're arbitrarily placing them into academic disciplines or institutions that they might not have belonged to, simply because you are trying to satisfy this quota of diversity. And we've seen this with black students over the years, where they're misqualified and ultimately underperform when they could have went to a number of even other prestigious universities. Something like, I don't know what these institutions are doing these days with their process of accepting people. I've seen some crazy articles. I don't know how much are clickbait and what's true now, but the kind of gatekeeping attitude, there's still plenty of prestigious avenues to go after, other than just as far as whatever affirmative action could get them, rather than what they could actually do. And I guess that kind of goes back to the point of the non-white, the other, towards the white liberal, if you will. He or she is just it's just really a number of a color, rather than an actual person with agency. I think in recent events, we've, the never-ending hypocrisy of these kind of white liberal attitudes, in a Hegelian lens, if you will. This is actually quite literally to him another form of slavery, in that these minority groups are unable to have that kind of confrontation with death, the death driver. It's just been shallowly replaced with just this kind of welfarist state, materialistic dependency. It's sad when you really look at the people that are out and doing this kind of activistic demonstration. Do they have the constitution that seems to comprise their own life is in order, in a kind of Jordan Peterson-esque way. One of my things that I've been saying about these kind of minority political groups and ambitions is where's the introspective of fatherlessness? Where's the introspective of our diets? Like, we're now becoming more, we've far surpassed on a demographic, if you want to look at it for a fat per race person ratio, if you will, like, it's Latinos and blacks who are by far, way fatter than everyone else. Obesity is just absolutely rampant, and while you can, defer back to this grander colonial system, even that doesn't hold up, as Tom Sowell points out rather eloquently, that, the Romans, historically, when they took and conquered, places like southern England, that kind of, on the surface, obviously, it was torturous and, a murderous time for the English, but obviously, in hindsight, as time, progresses and these kind of assemblages of bloodshed happen that I've kind of referred to on here, eventually these conflicts aren't just, it's not just this democratic spectacle of warfare. There's a spiritual element to it, if you want to, kind of take an Evolian look. But more than that, there's no way to be able to see that was going to happen. That that kind of influence over England, and how it contrasts with Scotland. There's since they weren't colonized, that kind of process never took place there, and so many times it's this confrontation with the colonizer, this confrontation with the other, where you actually redeem yourself, or it doesn't necessarily have to be progress, or but ultimately it's a phenomenon that does take place. And I think maybe to kind of move on a little bit and take some of Sowell's commentary a little bit further in 2021, and I think democracy, there's a lot of good neo-reactionary analysis about resentment and within racial groups, and why a democracy would want to commodify or use that for its own political purposes. But ultimately we have to also remember that this kind of left-wing motion of history that Moldbug points out, and it ultimately culminates with this representation of the marginalized, or the representation of the exceptional. But most of the time the exceptional shouldn't really be privileged or fetishized. And I think a defense of the ordinary, a defense for peaceful, harmonious racial minorities in America can't be done under a democracy. It can't represent us, it can't protect us anymore when we're to the point where we can't even use our law enforcement resources properly because they quite literally aren't allowed to. This was kind of what it was like to be sort of part of the intellectual public education minority students. Was, class was constantly being disrupted by these bad attitudes, and many times you just had to sit by and just take it because nobody was even allowed to deal with the situation. Nobody could mediate it. And I think in the grander scheme, democracy can't address this at all because it's not allowed to. The left wing attitude, if you will, the fetishes, this fetish of the marginal is at a complete odds end with the kind of populistic, ordinary representation, the ordinary, law-abiding, rule of law, if you will, attitude that we've come to love and respect. Can't be administered under a democracy anymore because there's no incentive for it. Questioning these kind of things, these paradoxes, is what the more compelling question is, rather than just economic opportunity, as Tom even points out himself. A lot of these universities, like Brown and Howard and these black founded universities, were far closer to slavery than us in this contemporary time. And it begs the question of what really has the ambitions and goals been for the kind of main minority groups that kind of all have their different sort of stories, but have assembled here with the Latino population, the black population, the natives, and obviously the Anglo or the European, whatever you want to look at it. What has it? What's to come of this? How are we even prepared for power to begin with? We're always told to celebrate this collapse of the white demographic, but I think people sometimes overlook that just because the white demographic is collapsing, ours is even the white demographic actually is the sort of dandelion that's growing out of the concrete cracks of technology, of this Orwellian liberal system that we find ourselves in, that tries to even subvert the values that we love about America many times. They're kind of the only real way to talk about these kind of subjects to begin with. Let's not mince words here. I know that most people who will watch this video will be, a white guy for the most part, let's be honest. There's nothing wrong with that. I obviously have no problem with that. I sympathize with these people greatly. I think they're being wronged morally. But, I think it could be also said that, while they're kind of doing that thing and bringing awareness to their own lives, ultimately, for the minority, we're just being commodified and, used in this fashion against the political adversaries of the greater elite class. And, do we want to just, ride out this resentment towards the greater dominant culture, against hierarchy, against all these scapegoats that we talk about all the time in society. And I think that's another point that Tom makes, is just like the state can't fix your problems. The state didn't create them to begin with. It goes back to my video where I took Justin Murphy's Base to Lose and argued that you should relish your privilege and affirm it and consider it a lucky gambit of the dice roll. And why would you want to not better the odds for that next generation to roll it on a less problematic dice, if you will? And I think that's actually giving gratitude back. I think that's paying back, is to plant the seeds for the next generation, if you will. We've totally stripped away community, obviously. Community isn't even talked about in this. The only time community is brought up is obviously when it's used against the greater dominant culture or the scapegoat. So obviously Tom's one of my favorite thinkers, despite my own reservations. And I think it could be said too, as he points out in Black Rednecks and White Liberals, one of the things I kind of emphasize on is language. And we ultimately speak the colonizer's tongue, and so why wouldn't the colonizer's language and attitude towards revolution ultimately exhibit through us? Who are we to say that this is actually authentic to ourselves? And if you even ask that and wonder if the revolution in and of itself is fake, then you have to contend with that, I suppose. And then I think that's when you realize that none of these. I suppose this could be considered even a warning, if you will, to we're seeing these kind of white collectivization happening politically. This identitarianism is sort of taking form against wokeism. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily. Obviously, I've played my role in help probably forming that. But what I'm getting at is, be careful of the grifter. I think that obviously white American culture didn't really have to deal with this kind of racial grift issue before, that Latinos and blacks and other groups might have more experience with. And I think that could be, this could be considered like a warning to you guys as well, and kind of seeing that you're going to be misrepresented more and more, as it's already happening. I'm not going to name names or anything. I don't want that for my channel, but plenty of times people have felt sold out or shafted and grifted by this kind of, oh, we're going to be for white values, or the sustainment of a white culture. But once they feel like they get sustainment of themselves, that's more than satisfactory, because after all, since I'm a part of this identity group and I became a success through it, obviously they kind of extrapolate that means that everyone else around them is doing better themselves as well, and that's just not true. And I don't think I think going forward that'll be something that could be an issue. But you can't just focus on the that's just focusing on the shadows of these things. Obviously there's some sort of want and will within these people to have a sort of community back. And I think we're all, I've said it, I keep saying it ironically, but we are kind of all in this together. And what does it all mean in comparison to the internet, really? As I've kind of laid out in this video to some degree, I'm trying to perhaps get at the this idea that white people are in this free fall in America. This is supposedly the the culture I look to assimilate and take part in. And if it's in a decline, only liberalism could really convince someone that when the dominant and most populous historical population is not doing very well, that's a big win for outside groups. This fantasy of linear progress through liberalism, I don't think it gets brought up enough. And one of Tom's kind of more famous quotables, I guess, is excerpt from Ever Wonder Why, where he's talking about American society and why it's exceptional. And I think perhaps in some of his conclusions misses the point. He kind of obviously has that economic lens, and progress is kind of not, maybe he doesn't totally shy away from the fact that obviously materialism and well-being aren't synonymous, and I think that kind of gets into the point of the welfare state and its critique to begin with. These policies aren't just because of statism. It's taking that relationship away from actually self-actualizing and realizing that it is a very messy process. It's a colonizer process in a way, that you're actually at war with yourself, with your older self, to kind of go through that motion of movement that's so famous within our culture, whether subcultures want to admit it or not. And I think overall I've sort of satisfied my contingent with this video, I suppose. I think the white liberal that Tom talks about is way more of a existential threat than any of these white supremacist ideologies that we're constantly told about. And it is kind of interesting how deep it really does go with. It's almost like a how could you believe that this sort of attitude and response that we've seen on a daily basis to just any sort of viral clip or any sort of interaction at all that involves a literal white person at this point that could be considered confrontational, just has this overtone, this resentment and this assumption and paranoia, even, that it's kind of just the assumption and the most least charitable interpretation of something possible, in almost in a willingly way. And I think if you want to look at some of the more esoteric right-wing spheres, you would kind of see yesterday that one of the things people were bringing up, including myself, was you can almost sense a bit of disappointment at yesterday's result, because it kind of flies in the face of this kind of worldview they've shaped, where they are the humanist bringers of enlightenment, or this they're this next epoch, but to obviously, and maybe this is something that is a Western metaphor, but that kind of we all implicitly kind of understand that for a next epoch there's always that kind of confrontation. It's never just, oh, we just changed for the sake of changing. There's a confrontation, there's error, there's blood, quite literally. And I think understanding that too, and understanding that these scapegoats are every bit as much of their identity, if not more so, than these actual goals that are being protruded. In fact, I would say that that's actually the case. But maybe that kind of understanding really cuts the dialogue that happens across the internet politically, about just constantly talking about other people's hypocritical attitudes and takes, when you really realize there is actually no loyalty to yourself and outside of representing these ideologies, and carrying out these scapegoats and white liberal othering in this kind of ritualistic secular fashion almost. But yeah, that was me extrapolating from one of my favorite based minority thinkers out there. But yeah, thanks for watching this head against the wall experience, I suppose.